Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the XP Billionaires podcast. My name is Ray Thegrum, and I am joined by my co hosts, Sky Knight and the Mel Zerker. So, as you guys have probably seen, we were not around last week. We were making some changes. Things have been happening over the last week or so that some good, some bad. But the good news is, if you want to see any of those changes or any more descriptions of what's going on, check it out on our newsletter at our coffee page, coffee.com/xpbillionaires. Don't really want to get into all of it today, but it's all there. But we're back. We're kind of a little bit on the reborn side. So we made some nice changes to the website at the very least. And yeah, lots of other things going on. So let's say hello to everybody. Sky, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm pretty good, pretty good. It's a beautiful day out. I'm getting some air into the place. It's lovely.
Yeah, no, we're finally starting to see some good weather around here. I mean, we did get a random snowfall a couple days ago, but it's gone already, which is great. So if you just wanted to get one more out of its system, that's fine, but I don't want to see it again, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was pretty weird. Just random snow one day. And hail?
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah,
saw some of the pictures. I saw someone cupping a giant hailstone in their hand. Oh, it was intense.
we've had some pretty crazy weather recently. But me, I've been mostly staying inside playing Digital Devil Saga. I'm trying to get it finished because I want to start Persona 5 Royal and I don't want to overdose on my Shin Megami Tensei-ish stuff. One at a time. One at a time.
That makes perfect sense. Absolutely. All right, and Mel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Also enjoying the nice weather. And I just finished a playthrough of a really, really fun game called Eastshade, which is basically what if Skyrim, but instead of shooting or I guess not shooting, instead of stabbing things, you were just looking for places to paint because they're beautiful. And it was very peaceful. It was what I needed.
Aw,
Isn't that lovely?
that is lovely.
And the way that you paint is you need inspiration. You need to see beautiful things to feel inspired. It's very nice.
So there's no like good old fashioned like Mario Paint style do it yourself kind of thing, or
No, we pick a location, it auto paints it. So, I mean, they could have done something there, but it's more just finding it and setting up the shop. And then if you need items or things, you sell people paintings of things they like. So you can be kind of like a commissioned artist if you want.
that's really fun. That's actually
It's
really
just
interesting.
really, it's like a nice little compact, like 10-hour game. Very, very nice. Very peaceful.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Speaking of beautiful vistas, I started the Uncharted series. I finished the first game so far. It's nice and short, got through it pretty well. And I have to say, like for a PS3 title, I was really impressed with the scenery in that game. It was actually a lot of really nice designs and just for whether it was outside or inside, they got it right. And even when you were in like a dank, desolate dungeon style tomb or whatever, it was still fairly colorful. They didn't resort to your desolate colors, which was nice.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of what helped is that, the sort of jungle-ish setting you were in part of the time, they really capitalized that and brought in those bright, rich greens, right? So it really helped it not be like just brown and gray.
Yeah, it did, and it was really nice to see. So I'm looking forward to playing the next one. I'm going to pace them a little bit. I know they're not overly long titles, so yeah, I'll take them one at a time and kind of see how it goes. All right. Well, let's say we get on to this week's topic. As I'm sure we all know, one of the most common, or probably the most common RPG genre is fantasy. The concept of swords and sorcery are probably the first thing that come to mind when you hear the term role-playing game. But one of the really great things to happen in RPGs lately has been when you take that pre-existing concept and add science to the mix. When done successfully, mixing science and sorcery can be one of the most interesting ways to expand a setting. But what does it take for it to be successful? and what games truly exemplify this blend? I mean, I'd really love to hear the opinions of our listeners, but first, here are ours. First off, what is your favorite RPG that comes to mind when you think of this concept? And, if you can give me a little bit of why, I think that'd be a great way to start things off. Sky, why don't you give us a start?
So I'm going to go with one of my favorite games of all time, Final Fantasy VI. I generally adore this combination simply because it's not done a ton, and it can be really inventive, and I live for that shit. So the whole game hinges on the combination of science and magic. So the Empire is attempting to fuse tech with magic, hence Magitech, obviously, and more insidiously, create modern mages through the use of unethical technology and science. Very unethical. Because the thing with this game is that instead of lost technology, which is a fairly common RPG trope, like in the past they had all this technology and then something happened and then they regressed, right? But instead of that, we have lost magic instead, which also comes with its own problems because the Empire understands it poorly enough that their experiments go very, very wrong on a few occasions. Looking at you, Kefka, you crazy ass clown, you. So basically, it's this excellent inversion of, the lost technology trope. And, I love that shit.
Yeah, it was a really interesting approach. Like this is one of the first games that comes to mind with mine. Now it's clearly not my favorite because I'm going to be talking about something else. But yeah, it did an amazing job, and I appreciated it so much more now that I'm having gone through it still a while ago, but more in my adult life than I did when I was first playing the game when I was about 8 or 9. I didn't understand it to the same effect, but I understand what's going on more. The fact that, finding magical beings and then essentially experimenting on them, siphoning their powers, ultimately killing them to integrate that magic into their technology was just it was insane. It was atrocious, but it weighed so heavily on the stakes of the series of the game too.
Yeah, it made the whole thing feel a lot more serious and the Empire feel a lot more scary. And plus, I mean, your main villain really is one of these experiments gone wrong. While at the same time, one of your party members is in fact the opposite, the one who they actually got it right in. But she still has to live with the fact that basically something died to give her magic.
And while it wasn't overly shown off in the game, I mean that's definitely a very interesting subtext for the character too. So
Well, yeah, exactly. And this is why, like, I totally agree with you and say that, if you only played this game as a kid, play it again as an adult because you'll get way more out of it and understand that subtext, which makes you think, this could have been, like, they could have gone really freaking dark with this subject matter.
absolutely.
What
Yeah.
they kind of gloss over is pretty horrific.
Which is why I think this is one of the games that needs a harder remake, but
Yeah.
let's see how well Final Fantasy VII is handled before I say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mel, what game comes to mind for you?
Well, I'm also going to repeat one that I've mentioned before because it's just the perfect game. Is Open Sorcery. This is the game where you play as an AI who is basically dealing with magical and emotional threats. One thing about the game, which I didn't mention before, is that part of the backstory is that you are a firewall, but the way that they did that is that they bound a fire elemental spirit and they chained it with C++ to control it, which is just such a weird concept that like this is the way that you make firewalls in this world, is that you find something that already wants to, burn things that are risks. And I think that makes for a really cool game. I really like the way that it explores kind of sentience as it learns kind of human behavior and human or normal trends. It's just like a super interesting game where you are like literally fighting magic and fey creatures and doing it through the structure of a program that is running.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. I'm gonna have to see if I can try this, because putting magic directly into a computerized structure like that is pretty wild, actually.
Yeah, like it's just, I mean, I know that the creator is like a huge fan of puns, and that's how kind of the idea evolved, but it's the group of characters you meet and things like that that are also magical. Like in this world, like technology is a platform upon which magic happens, which is very interesting. Like it's still primarily like everything in the game is about magic. But because you view it from a technology angle, it gives it this really weird texture.
Excellent. It's under $5 Canadian on Steam.
Look
Wow.
at that. Or you can get it on your phone. Phone's nice too.
Oh, they have it on phones. I
I
didn't
know,
know.
right? You can anywhere you want to go, you can go. And it is one of those games where you play through kind of multiple times to get like the quote unquote perfect ending, where you're sort of building relationships about who can deal with different situations in the best way possible, trying to help everybody confirm kind of the ultimate threat that's building throughout the story. But yeah, like it's just so interesting, and this thing about this magical creature who's being kind of taught human culture enough to learn what it means when humans cry is just like it's really really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I got to get around to it.
Yeah.
I think when I looked at it, it's actually cheaper on the phone, so it might even be worth it to grab it that way. So definitely worth giving a shot. So
Yeah, I mean
yeah,
it's like you were saying earlier, right? Like this idea of like things that were created out of magic is so interesting. I mean, this one you don't get the sense of that's a necessarily a bad thing. Like it's definitely not a we're taking magical creatures and destroying them, although that is definitely a theme of my D&D game. Um, but the idea of taking magical creatures and like merging them with tech is just like such a cool concept.
remind us to show you the Numenera books because I think you'd really dig them based on that.
Sounds
Oh,
good.
yeah, yeah. We'll talk afterwards. Oh,
Yeah.
so cool.
All right. As for me, one of my favorite game series, and again, I can't help but talk about it, but given the circumstances and given the subject matter, it makes sense. But the Trails series, so Trails in the Sky, Trails of Cold Steel, they have what's called orbital technology. And it's one of the more interesting blends I've seen in a while. So this is a world that's harnessed the elemental energy of quartz, which essentially has its own magical properties to begin with. And they've used it to offer modern luxuries that wouldn't normally exist in a timeline that feels like it belongs in, I'd say, the late 1930s. Like for the general public, you've got proper lighting, you've got airships, you've got speedboats, and even more surprisingly, this is more of a government luxury, but the internet. If you belong to a military organization or a mercenary group, or you're part of the bracers, you can get yourself special ordnance that allows you to set refined quartz, and it then gives you the ability to cast arts, which is essentially magic. Well, I'll say that it's akin to magic because there is actually a faction of witches in this world who are able to use proper magic without the assistance of ordnance. I just like that it adds this modern spin to a past era, and they've managed to make it feel so natural that it could have happened. Like it makes me feel like this is something that could have happened if this were a real thing.
Yeah, if magic was real, this is a way it could have been used, in our own world, right? Like, it's not quite an alternate history because, it's totally constructed different world. But you're seeing what could have happened if we had access to magical abilities in the 1930s. There's got to be a punk name for this. I just don't know what it is. You
Orb
know,
punk,
I
quartz
like
punk.
that's what it is now.
So I guess the next thing, now that we've got some games in mind, what do you guys think are some of the biggest challenges that developers face when you're blending science and sorcery?
I think it comes down to reasoning. Is there a good reason to combine magic and tech? Does it add anything substantive to the story? Is there a good explanation for the approach? The thing is, this sort of stuff takes a lot of inventiveness to pull off well. And if you don't have a really imaginative writing staff, I don't know. Like, I think there's a reason you don't see it a ton, right? Like, if everyone was good at combining subjects that were on the face of it total opposites, we'd live in a much more interesting world, for starters.
No, I think you're right there. That is an interesting perspective. Going like for me, it was a matter of finding the right balance between science and sorcery. So, and I think that kind of fits in with what you're saying. Like they have to have there has to be an explanation, but at the same time, there needs to be a way to balance it without making it one or the other. Like for example, like let's take Rogue Galaxy. Like I take this as this is a sci-fi video game. There is both magic and tech in the universe, but they didn't come together in any way. They were definitely separate in their own right. Whereas, let's look at Shadow Hearts, where technology was used to mix with the Emigre manuscript, which was a book that taught resurrection, the magic of resurrection. So they combined that tech with said magic to create the mutant apes in Shadow Hearts Covenant, but as well, they also made the Awakeners in Shadow Hearts from the New World. I just think that it is probably the biggest challenge, one of the hardest things that can be done in your story writing. So you're right, you need reasoning for it, but reasoning and balance have to go hand in hand.
I think that's a fair assessment. Something like Shadow Hearts really showed the problem with working with minimal knowledge in both subjects. Like, there was a lot of screw ups with the Emigre manuscript. And it wasn't until much, much, much later, and through basically pure luck, that they used the Emigre manuscript successfully, in as far as you can call it successfully.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to mostly agree with that. Like, I think when you make up a story or a world, you've got to sort of justify the world that these things exist in. And like, we talk a lot about like character motivation and why they do things, but like, why did a world evolve in the way it did? Like what thing happened that made it possible for both magic and science to coexist? It makes me think about like I was watching this really interesting YouTube series about how basically because we designed computers originally to deal with processing and memory in separate places, we have this like legacy problem where at some point like there is a quicker way to design a computer like that does both of those things at once. But because we built it in this way, we're sort of stuck now. And that's sort of like the world when you have something that's magic and science. It's like how did one not override the other? How do both have strengths and benefits and places in the world that it's not just like, well, obviously we use magic. I mean, that comes naturally, for example. I think you get some weird issues sometimes. Like I'm playing Persona 5 Royal right now, and the whole thing where like Wakaba Futaba's mom and her stuff with cognitive science, I think is just like there's some really interesting historical stuff about science in the Persona series, but the way that they throw it into 5, it just feels so strange, and it's they just don't take the time to really help you understand why in a world that personas exist in, where technology fits in the same way.
Yeah, Persona kind of became more abstract as the series went on.
Yeah, like Persona 3 was blatant about the connection with technology and shadows, and that made a lot of sense. But in the newer games, like 4 basically ignored that it existed. And 5, I appreciate that they're trying to sort of bring it back. But if you don't have kind of the historical bit of why shadows are the way they are, it just sort of ends up being this weird thing. I don't think it's helped by the fact that they just call it cognitive science, but they use a PS. Like they're trying to make it weird instead of just saying cognitive science, just like a real thing.
Well, and they've generally, as the series has gone on, they've gotten away from its roots as, the connection between the personas and the fact that they are masks, that they are part of the identity. It's gotten less explicit, I think, as the series has gone on, and they've basically started hinting more at the roots of the persona rather than, going into it explicitly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that just makes it feel it doesn't have the same balance that it has in earlier games. So anyways, I mean, the big thing I think is that if you're going to make up a story where there's magic and science, you have to think about the world that created that. Like, what world made space for both of those things to coexist? And I think that's a flaw that some games have. Is they just kind of think, hey, it'd be cool to have these things together, not how did this happen?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So I got one last question for you guys. So out of the games that you've played that do have the blend of science and sorcery, which specific blend itself is the most unique? So not necessarily the game, but the blend itself.
I am going to go with basically the combination in the Exa series, which is the Artanelico and Surge Concerto games. I've spoken about these games in different ways over the podcast series, but what's of note here is the combination of music, programming, and genetic engineering. It's a hell of a mix. So, to put it as briefly as I can, the Raventails, who are the singing spellcaster race of this universe, they are basically singing programming code. They are changing sound into energy, which acts basically as magic. Why am I saying programming code? It's formatted as programming code. The Raventails are actually linked to servers, so to speak. They draw their magic from there. They've used some constructions of technology as we know it to inform their spell casting race. And that's where genetic engineering comes into it, because the Raventails are not human in the same way. They can reproduce with humans, but they aren't human in the same way. They have different requirements from humans in terms of actually keeping themselves alive. And yeah, they were basically genetically engineered to be like these spellcasters. But by the time the games happen, that's so far back in the past that you only start becoming aware of it. Well, I guess you know by the end of the first game, but it's not there on its face necessarily at first. Anyway, I think it's a freaking brilliant idea, and I really hope Gust, the developer, returns to this series.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, like yeah, everything was programming related in that which was really interesting. Like even certain songs you would learn by installing a crystal, which was a really interesting concept.
Yeah, they have basically a built-in crystal port to help them develop, and that's where they put. Oh, there's something they use to keep themselves alive that happens through that port too, I believe. I
Yeah.
can't remember at the moment. But basically, without that, they have, I think it's only months to live. They can't live long without that being in place.
Yeah. Yeah. But still, yeah, definitely a great mix there. Like that's yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. They're casting what we would see as magic, or often they appear almost like summons, like a creature will come down and do an attack or whatever.
That alone is actually pretty neat.
Well, now that sounds really cool. I don't know very much about the series, but like singing programming is awesome.
All right.
Anyways,
Well, before you get to that, it boils down to three things that make this game awesome. So song magic, which creates an amazing soundtrack, a brilliant storyline, and all the innuendo you could ask for.
There's a lot of innuendo.
I don't know. I can ask for a lot of innuendo.
You'll get it.
Okay. All right. High praise. The one I was going to talk about is a game called The Magic Circle. I definitely focused on games that have this like coding aspect. And maybe I'll have to explore why that was later. But this is a game about game design. So The Magic Circle in this series is basically a game that was stuck in development hell. It had like an amazing first game. People loved it. It got kickstarted. And for the last 20 years, people have been working on this second game, The Magic Circle. So you play the game as a QA tester, and you start exploring all the bits of the game that still exist but aren't connected in meaningful ways. So the game is primarily like very magic. There's different areas. So there's some areas that are more science fiction focused, but there's areas, especially early on, that are very magic focused. But the way that you deal with problems is you actually like hack the creatures and items in the world to make them useful. So if something's attacking you, you could just have another monster fight it. You could also go into its code and add yourself as someone who is considered like a friendly entity. So you have this like sort of like programming problem solving thing that you're doing to try to solve all these issues. And it's just so easily done for someone to start understanding the concept of how coding works and how you can kind of build structures of how the monsters are going to act. And you can also just do silly things like be like, this monster's pretty great, but it would be a lot cooler if it was just a rock. And then you just take all of the things that made the monster cool and you give them to the rock, and now you have a rock monster who fights for you and has teeth. So it's just the way that they kind of allow you to play with the concept. And the game definitely plays the idea that the coders, the people who made this game, are gods in this world. And you sort of have to sneak around to not get caught by the gods of the world. It's super, super interesting. Super weird.
That's amazing. Damn it, you're giving me such a list of games to play, you.
What? Yeah, I don't know. It's such a weird thing, but I don't know. You really have to play it to like experience how weird it is. And you've got like these, you can overhear bits of like what the designers are talking about as you're exploring different areas because you have access to like their webcams and their like audio. So you kind of get some of this interior stuff, and you know somebody has added these back doors specifically for you, and it's very strange. Anyways, but the way that you play with basically turning magical creatures into hackable creatures is really cool.
That's an awesome concept.
That kind of reminds me of Horizon, you know, like how Aloy jacks into those creatures and can get them to do her bidding and
Yeah.
all that.
Yeah.
Speaking of, I guess there's not really, it's not really magic in that world, but
No, that was all about tech.
Yeah. But on the other hand, while there might not have been magic, it was also one of these strange blends of tech and pre-civilization as we know it life.
Yeah, well, like, I mean, the game sort of is like people don't understand the tech, which makes it like magic, right? Like, you have the people who worship the mountain, and like, there's a random baby outside the mountain. Like, that could be magic, right? Until you understand the whole concept of the story. Then you're like, oh, okay, it's all tech. But a lot of it's based on perception, right? Like, there's that, I forget what the quote comes from, but we're like, the only difference between magic and technology is like how much you understand of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the only other one that I can think of actually comes from Suikoden 4 and subsequently Suikoden Tactics, the concept of rune cannons. So this is like literally a fusion of tech and magic, which I thought was really cool. So they were created by a guy named Warlock who learned how to harness the seeds from this giant tree, and to say more is spoilers, and harnessing elemental runes within them. So normally the runes go on people, they go on your hands or your forehead to give you magical abilities. But in this case, he's put them into these seeds. Once the shell itself was figured out, it was just a matter of developing a mechanism that could fire the shell. So they found different ways to do that in, inventing the rune cannon. It was just a really interesting idea. Apparently, there are different mechanisms for the rune cannons. Apparently, different countries developed them in different ways, which was part of the premise for Suikoden Tactics, why they were being researched by Walter and Kirill. It was definitely an interesting, perfect kind of blend to a weapon.
Well, yeah, and in an established series like Suikoden, that combination is actually freaking terrifying because by the time Suikoden 4 rolls around, you know what magic in this universe is capable of.
Mm-hmm.
It's not unreasonable to say, okay, what if they infused stronger runes into rune cannon ammo? Like, terrifying conceptual stuff that comes to mind.
Oh, absolutely. But this is probably one of my most favorite kind of styles of a blend is when it's put into standard weaponry. But yeah, like I don't see this kind of mix very often. Like the last time I think I've seen a magical gun was from Outlaw Star, and which is an anime, and I absolutely loved the concept of that. But I don't see that kind of thing in my video games as much.
No, and in fact, even earlier in Suikoden, while there had been guns, they'd been fairly primitive early, what we would consider early firearms, like unwieldy long range basic sniper rifles or, low accuracy pistols.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, I think that is going to wrap it up for this week. So I want to hear what you guys think about the concept. Are there any games that I've missed out on that have this kind of blend? Let me know. Find me on Twitter at BillionairesXP, or you can also find me on Instagram at Rafe Thegrim. Sky, where can everyone find you?
I'm at SkyKnightXP on Twitter and Twitch, and SkyKnight.xp on Instagram.
And Mel, where can everyone find you?
You can find me on Twitter at FeministGamer3 or Instagram at just FeministGamer. And I have a D&D actual play podcast called Darkness and Dragons. We air every week on Twitch, Wednesdays at 6:30. So check it out. And then you can check it out on YouTube or our podcast if you miss it.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah, we'll definitely be there now. So looking forward to the next one. And check out our newly revamped website for much more accessibility in terms of, well, ease of access. xpbillionaires.wordpress.com is the address. And yeah, Sky did a lot of work making that look good. So please check it out.
Thank you.
Yay!
And lastly, like I said at the beginning, we have a monthly newsletter that we put out on our Coffee page. This month does give us all the changes that are happening with the XP Billionaires right now. So definitely check that out. Again, that's coffee.com/XP Billionaires. Feel free to send us a donation, but if not, just spread the word that we are getting better and better as we go. All right, so that's going to be it for us this week. And just remember, whether you're traveling by wormhole or by magic portal, you always get to keep gaming. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.